One of the most enjoyable experiences when it comes to reading manga is the process of finding something new to read. Now, of course, actually reading a manga and getting invested in a story is a much better experience, but I think there's definitely a lot of value in the process of finding something new. It's a process that reflects your taste and interests, yet one that also encourages change and growth. You could always stick to your typical genres and type of stories that you're comfortable with, and that's 100% okay, but in the process of trying to find something new to read, you might discover a manga you're interested in that's out of your comfort zone and decide to try it out. Either way, whatever someone wants to read is entirely up to them, just as long as they're enjoying the process of finding that next manga and having fun with it. Now, there's a ton of different ways to go about this, like word of mouth, social media, websites, YouTube videos, a friend's recommendation, or browsing your local bookstore. As for me, I pretty much partake in all the ones I just mentioned, but when it comes to that selection, like a lot of other people, my main interest is the manga story and/or art. See, I'll pretty much read any genre, but the manga has to intrigue me with at least one of those aspects. Most of the time, the story tends to be the biggest factor in drawing me in. However, in the case of the subject of this video, it happened to be the artwork. You see, a few summers ago I was stuck in a car for roughly 7 hours as I was partaking in a road trip to go visit some family upstate. To pass the time, I caught up on some manga, watched a movie, chatted with some friends, and browsed social media. Now, at the time, I followed one of those manga aesthetics accounts on Twitter. Essentially, they just post random panels that showcase some great artwork, which was something I enjoyed seeing in my feed. Well, during that road trip, as I was scrolling through Twitter, they happened to post this. Now, at a first glance, the panel isn't all that much. It's pretty minimalistic, but has some impressive shading, a great use of darker tones, and a visually appealing composition. Though, I mean, if we're being honest, the main intrigue of the panel isn't the composition or the shading. It's, of course, the subject. See, if you didn't know this about me, I'm a massive sucker for the romance genre. Anime or manga, I've seen and read a fair share of it and unapologetically love it. So as soon as I saw this panel, and considering the fact that I had a few hours to kill, I immediately found out what the title was and started reading what I thought was going to be a wholesome romance manga. And man, was I wrong. Oh. Okay? Alright, this was a bit different from what I was expecting. What? Okay, what the fuck? Bokutachi ga Yarimashita, or We Did It, is an extremely unique and twisted story that culminates into one of the most unforgettable experiences I've had with the manga. And that isn't derogatory in the slightest, it's actually a compliment, as I'm a huge fan of this manga and its incredibly dark narrative. Hell, I mean, if you don't want to take my word for it, Hajime Isayama, the creator of Attack on Titan, stated during an interview that it was one of his favorite current manga while it was releasing from 2015 to 2017. It's a story that leaves a pretty big impression on you, which is of course thanks to the artist, Araki Hikaru, and the author, Kaneshiro Muneyuki. Now, if the name of the author sounds familiar, you might recognize the name from Jagan, or maybe from the more recent Super Ball Girls, but more likely, you probably know him as the author of Blue Lock. Yeah, the writer for one of the best-selling sports manga also wrote this, which I'll tell you right now is a completely different story than Blue Lock, and while the two share some slight similarities, they're pretty much entirely different in every aspect. But I'm not here to talk about Blue Lock or the significance of a striker's ego, so let's dive into We Did It by first going over its extremely unique and memorable plot. Our story begins with the introduction of the protagonist, Tobio, a high school student whose main priorities in life are losing his virginity and getting a bowling score of 200. See, Tobio doesn't have any substantial dreams or goals he's striving for, rather his only wish is to live a completely average life, a life undisturbed from any complications or importance and one he's content with. Alongside his best friends Isami and Maru, Tobio goes to your typical run-of-the-mill high school, where they mainly goof around in their club room with a graduated 20-year-old they refer to as Paisen. However, their school sits directly across from another called Yaba High, which has a history of violence and is primarily comprised of delinquents. One day as Maru and Tobio are walking home from school, they happen to see a group of Yaba High students where Maru gets the great idea to yell at them that they should die. But unfortunately for the pair, a different group of Yaba High students happen to overhear them and immediately begin to threaten the two because of Maru's statement. Thankfully, Paisen comes running to the rescue, paying off the delinquents and washing away any trouble that might have befell them. Or so they thought. The next day, Tobio and his friends visit a local game center, spending the night rollerblading and singing karaoke without a single care in the world. But what seems like a normal night of fun and games suddenly takes an unexpected turn when Maru is kidnapped by that same group of students from the previous day. And if you couldn't tell, they still aren't exactly happy about his comments, as the students beat Maru to a bloody pulp, shove him inside a cardboard box, and place him on the hood of Paisen's car. Upon discovering their friend in the state he's been left in, Tobio vows to get revenge, and the group quickly get to work on devising a plan to get back at the students from Yaba High. After some contemplation, the crew come to an agreement on a plan that Paisen refers to as Operation Scaredy Cat, which goes a little something like this. Step 1. Sneak into Yaba High in the middle of the night. Step 2. Plant homemade C4 explosives around the windows of the school. And finally, Step 3. Set them off the following day during lunch and watch from the rooftop laughing as students run away in fear. Now to clarify, the homemade C4 has about as much explosive power as, say, a small firework, and while that still isn't exactly safe and is an extremely stupid plan, it's not like the C4 you'd see in your typical FPS. But regardless, the group carry out steps 1 and 2 of the plan successfully and meet the next day on the roof in order to execute the final step. And with the press of the first detonator, to their surprise, the plan seems like it's gonna work. As students panic in confusion and run outside, Tobio and his friends burst into laughter, proceeding to press the detonator button as fast as they can as they watch the windows break one by one. However, what Paisen referred to as the perfect crime is about to take a sudden shift, as with the press of the final button, their prank evolves into something far worse. Rather than a simple window breaking, an actual massive explosion goes off, setting a large portion of the school ablaze and with it the students inside. Heaps of dark smoke begin to rise out of the classrooms, cries for help mixed with the sound of a raging siren ring throughout the air while Yaba High transitions from what was once a school into a fiery hell on earth. As Tobio watches the students engulfed in flames screaming out in agony, he realizes the atrocity happening before them is a product of their own prank, and the average life he so desperately cherished is about to be forever changed. Yeah. Not exactly what I'd call a romance. Not to mention, I don't think I've ever been so mentally thrown off while reading a manga to the point where I had to check and make sure I was reading the right one. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't eager to keep on reading because, wow, it was way more interesting than anything I could have expected. And while romance does play a somewhat significant role in the story, it's far from pretty. Though, in all honesty, nothing about this story is pretty, as the best way I can describe it is a detailed look at people's minds who have been backed into a corner and the effect it has on them. It's an extremely psychological tale, and rather than sugarcoat the subject or play it safe, it faces it head on, as it really showcases the unpleasant side of the human psyche. As good-natured as people can be, everyone's prone to negative thoughts, and this story excels at highlighting those thoughts and putting a major focus on what happens when they consume you. To me, this is one of the key reasons as to what makes We Did It so interesting, and while it is one of the driving forces for the narrative, it also serves as a catalyst for the characters' growth as they evolve from one-dimensional nuisances into actual fleshed-out characters. Though, even as they develop throughout the story, the catalyst for their growth also reveals the ugly truth to their natures, which, if you couldn't guess, aren't exactly all that commendable. See, Tobio and his friends are all morally dubious, unlikable scumbags, and while the story definitely plays a role in them being so unlikable as these attributes are heightened due to the circumstances of their situation, it's clear from the get-go that they aren't great people. I mean, their plan for revenge involved making homemade bombs to scare high schoolers, which I think most people would agree is a tad overboard. And sure, they clearly didn't intend for it to turn out the way it did, but the simple fact that they used C4 for a prank, yet alone acted out a plan for revenge, should paint a clear picture as to how morally inept these characters are. But as you read through the story, you kind of can't help but understand some of the choices they make. Obviously, I'm not condoning any of the actions the main characters take in this manga, but for a moment, imagine yourself in their shoes. Sure, you think you'd immediately turn yourself in as that's the morally right thing to do, but not everyone's perfect. Selfishness, greed, and envy are all incredibly strong emotions, and to be swept away by these emotions and let them overtake you in a time of distress when you think your life is over is understandable to a certain degree, which in my opinion makes We Did It feel extremely real. In terms of human emotions, reactions, inner thoughts, and decisions the characters make, they all feel like natural responses from being in such a terrible spot. Plus, I mean, these characters are teenagers, their emotions are all over the place, they're trying to find themselves, and they aren't exactly all that mature, so the fact that they get consumed by these heightened negative thoughts because of their messed up situation makes sense. And to be honest, this story works really well because it's told through the mind of teenagers. In comparison to adults, teenagers are more susceptible to their emotions, so for this specific narrative, having teenagers be the ones put through this hell benefits the story and allows for the author to go more in-depth with the emotions of the characters and their own personal journeys. Characters that, like I said before, are unlikable, morally inept scumbags, which are traits that actually benefit the story as well. Though, out of all the characters, Tobio is probably the most tolerable and is kind of relatable in a sense. Unlike the other teens in this story, Tobio is the only one who shows any genuine sign of remorse and regret, We get to see how haunting and traumatic this experience is for him as he has to come to terms with his reality. So underneath his very flawed character and poor sense of morals, there's actually some humanity to him. This results in that sense of relatability that I talked about, which helps aid the reader's investment in the story and Tobio himself. And because he's the main character, the key themes of the story are primarily depicted through him. Themes like existentialism, coming to understand the harsh realizations of this world, and learning that there are consequences to your actions. Getting to watch Tobio struggle as he navigates through these themes adds to that investment and really drives the psychological element of the narrative. And while these themes definitely play a major factor in Tobio's journey, they also accumulate to create an extremely uncomfortable atmosphere. Even if there seems to be a glimmer of hope or happiness, there's always this looming presence of dread hanging over every scene. This incredibly eerie feeling that something's about to go horribly wrong at any given moment really messes with your head and generates this abundance of anxiety and discomfort, which in turn strengthens the shades of horror present within this manga. Whether it be the grotesque renditions of death, some incredibly chilling scenes, and some ultra-realistic, over-exaggerated facial expressions that pretty much serve as physical manifestations of the character's inner thoughts, there's some pretty horrifying imagery that's guaranteed to make you feel uneasy. Now, of course, this is a product of the author and the artist combination working together extremely well, but I feel that this same sentiment can be applied to the entirety of We Did It as a whole. Throughout the course of the manga, it really feels like the pair expand off one another's talents and bring out the best in each other's crafts, as the storytelling and artwork flow so seamlessly together and merge to create a cohesive, well-made final product. And they genuinely knocked it out of the park. From its grounded yet bizarrely dark premise to its heavy themes and psychological aspects as we explore the lasting effects that actions have on someone's mind, it genuinely is an incredible story and one that I wish so many more people knew about. We Did It is a truly unforgettable tale, and one that I honestly cannot recommend enough. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thank you for watching, I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a good one. Peace.